So, how do you turn this into this?
Mr. Speed and Fanny Craddock, Gordon Ramsay, Matthew, Jeffrey, Thomas, Killarina, Geisler, Michael, Nina, Matt Bustle.
Well, it can't be too difficult, can it? Or so I thought. It wasn't, however, as straightforward as I first imagined, and in this video I would like to take you through the steps I went through to convert this into this.
Mr. Speed and Fanny Craddock.
I'm going to cover the technical considerations, the musical considerations, and also the creative considerations. Now, this is principally about taking a piece of music and putting it into Emvoice One, which is a VST plugin. It's a vocal synthesizer. Now, even if you don't have Emvoice One, and perhaps you're not even interested in vocal synthesizers, there are a couple of takeaways from this whole process. At least for me there were. And quite possibly you might find them interesting and hopefully a little encouraging and possibly inspirational. So you might want to hang around and watch the video. However, the first part is concerned with getting the music into Emvoice One. So if you have absolutely no interest in that at all and want to jump to the creative bit, then jump to this point in the timeline. The creative bits are mainly about coming up with the words or the lyrics for the piece, and that was an effort in itself, which I shall go through. So if you are into words, if you're a singer-songwriter, if you write songs, if you use anything with lyrics, then this is something which you might want to have a look at as well. Okay, let's get started. Let's start with putting the music into Emvoice One. Now, this is not a tutorial on Emvoice, so I'm just going to tell you what happened and the steps I took to do what I did. There are lots of other videos about it, and you can download the manual from Emvoice if you wish. Links, of course, in the description. So first of all, why did I choose this piece? It is Solfeggietto by C.P.E. called Philip Emanuel Bach. He was the second son of J.S. Bach and apparently no mean composer in his own right. You've probably heard the piece. It's something I played or attempted to play when I was learning the piano. And what's quite interesting about it, it is essentially a monophonic piece, which is obviously ideal for one person or perhaps two people to sing. So this is what attracted me to the piece first of all. So the first step was to get the music into Emvoice. Now, you can click notes onto Emvoice, but I find this really slow, really difficult, really clunky. You don't really know what notes you are clicking in, the system doesn't really tell you. And I find the easiest way to get a piece of music into Emvoice is through the MIDI listen mode. So to do this, you simply drop a MIDI recording onto the Emvoice track, click MIDI listen, and play the piece in real time. It listens to what's going on and it puts it into its own little editor. You can also record MIDI from a MIDI keyboard in real time as well. Now, there are a couple of issues surrounding this. I've written, or perhaps adapted is probably a better word, a couple of other pieces for Emvoice which are linked in the description, and I find the best way to get an accurate representation of the notes is often to slow down the playback speed. Now, clever pianists often use Solfeggietto as a showpiece. They play it at a fantastic speed. Now, when I was playing it or attempting to, I was quite happy going with Allegretto, which wasn't too fast. However, to get these MIDI notes into Emvoice, I slowed the tempo down to around 30 BPM, and that seemed to work fairly well. The notes went in fairly accurately. However, if there are too many notes close together or played legato style, then Emvoice doesn't like it and it throws up a couple of errors. Typically region too complex, and the section is redded out or pinked out and the system won't sing it. So Solfeggietto is typically one big legato piece, so this obviously didn't work and I got error messages all over the place. So after much trial and error and a bit jiggery pokery, do not underestimate the power of jiggery pokery. I discovered that I could put about 16 legato notes into Emvoice and it wouldn't throw up an error. Now, I can't say with any degree of certainty at all whether this will work for every piece of music, but it did work on this piece. So in the Midi Editor in Cubase, and one of the things which is nice about this, it tells you which notes each of the little blocks are in the key editor, which you don't get to see on Emvoice. So in Cubase, I removed all the overlaps, just in case there were any. I made all the notes legato, and then I reduced the length of every 16th note. So when it was imported into Emvoice, you could see there was a break between a couple of sections, so they were not one big region, and it seemed fairly happy with that. So I finally got the notes into Emvoice, at least most of them. Now, one thing which I probably should have checked was the actual pitch range of the piece, and I didn't. So the Emvoice engine at the moment, it has a total pitch range from C0 to C5, and Thomas the vocoder can sing this. However, I wanted Lucy and possibly Jay to sing it, so they have a smaller range. So there's a large white band in the center of Emvoice, and this will vary depending on which voice you have selected. Lucy has a natural range which runs from E2 to A4, and J has a natural range which runs from E1 to C4. At the top and the bottom of the natural range bands are darkened areas in Emvoice. Now, these are notes which the voices will sing, but they are outside their natural range, so they don't sound so good, and I will give you an example of this in a second. So having got what I thought were all the notes into Emvoice, when I played it back there were some notes missing. Now, I assume this is because if notes are outside the grayed out areas above or below those, then the system simply ignores them. And when I played this back, some notes in the Lucy part were missing. Now, I couldn't transpose the whole piece down because that would have pushed notes off the bottom of the lower grey area. The only thing I could think of doing was just to take a section which contained the notes which were outside the range and to transpose those down. I did that, and I added the missing notes. There were about 3 sections, I think, where I had to do this and add notes. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's going to sound a bit weird because part of the tune is being played and then it suddenly jumps down an octave. And yes, you're probably right, but I discovered when using the voices that it wasn't as dramatically apparent as it might have been if you were playing this on a piano or an instrument. At least I don't think so, but you can have a listen to it and let me know what you think. So the second consideration was I had all the notes in, but some notes were way down into the grey area at the bottom. And this is what it sounded like when Jay was singing them.
Sing low, bring Miss Yo Zinger, low, in your opera lamp on under in pin tundra.
So, not ideal, shall we say. So I thought, well, I'll do the same thing with these sections. So this occurred in a few places. So I took a phrase, if you like, possibly 4, probably 8 notes, and I just transposed those up an octave. So everything more or less fitted into the white band for Lucy and the white band for Jay. I think I did allow myself the luxury of allowing 1 or possibly 2 notes, I think on one occasion, into the grey band. Now, believe it or not, I spent about a week Now, believe it or not, I spent about a week experimenting with this, experimenting with the MIDI data, getting the MIDI notes into the system, transposing different sections so they were within the vocal ranges. So at this point, I hope possibly that we are rejoining our friends who have absolutely no interest in Emvoice One, and we get onto the creative side. And this essentially involved thinking of words that the voices were going to sing. So first of all, I wondered, well, if I was going to sing it, what would I sing? Now, I can't sing, as you will know if you've seen some of my other videos, but I thought I would probably ba-dee-da-dee-dum-dee-dum it. Ba-da-dum-ba-dee-dee-da-da-dum-be-dee-da-da-da-da-da. And so on. And I tried this, and it was just terrible. Not my singing, but even getting Lucy and Jay to sing something like this, and it didn't. The thing is, it didn't make any sense. So it was just someone humming annoyingly in the background. So the next thing I thought of was to use vowel sounds, A, E, I, O, and U. So there was some consistency and there was a pattern in the lyrics, if you like. But rather than just use a single sound as the consonant, I thought I would make a list of all the consonants in the alphabet and then put the vowels next to them, a little bit like this. So I tried that. It sounded like this. Now that still didn't work for me. I think probably because it was just absolute nonsense, and it sounded like nonsense, and there was just no sense of cohesion to the lyrics or words at all. So my next thought was to put some sort of pretend language into it, so at least it sounded as if the singers were making sense. I was reminded of Carl Jenkins and his Addy Amos recordings. I shall leave a link to one or more of those in the description. He wrote some fantastic music using a made-up language. Now, I didn't know what it was, I wasn't going to copy it anywhere, and then I thought of Lorem Ipsum. So this is a sort of pseudo-Latin language which typesetters use to fill in sections and blocks of a mock layout. And there are, of course, Lorem Ipsum generators on the web, so I tried one of those and I came up with this. Now, I do not speak Latin at all. I have no idea how close to Latin this may or may not be, but I thought I would give it a try, and it sounded like this.
Lorem ipsum doleam ventrilo nos abyssum Nostradamus visi evalentum ordose never la palo ventralo menentum si vanentoris taupium mela prima and
possibly because, again, this didn't make any sense. This, again, it didn't work for me either. Now, the other two pieces using Emvoice, which I wrote or adapted from other pieces of music, had titles and words which I could play off. So there is the Tortilla song, which plays off Ave Maria, have a tortilla, and there's the Lemon Coma song, which plays off Nessun Dorma, Lemon Coma. Links, yes, are in the description, should you want to check these out. And then something in me said, well, what about doing something about cooking or something about food? So I'm thinking about cooking, and something suggested Mrs. Beaton and Fanny Craddock. Now, you probably have to be of an age and have an interest in cooking to recognise those names, and probably you also have to be in the UK. Mrs. Beaton, for the record, was probably the first celebrity chef in an age of books, not TV. And then I thought, well, why don't I just make a list of chefs' names? Now, this was not a light bulb moment. Nothing went bing up here. It was just a sort of, why don't I try this? Now, there's a saying which I actually heard for the first time on a Steven Seagal movie. And he said, chance favours the prepared mind. And I thought this was a wonderful saying. It is a reworking of one of several alternatives, one of them being, the harder I work, the luckier I get. So I think all this stuff, all these thoughts about words, and obviously the references to cooking in the other pieces had been bubbling around in my subconscious somewhere, and they just poked out the idea, well, just put chefs' names in and see if that works. Now, I can only think of 2 or 3 or maybe 4 or 5 chefs offhand, but here, Google, of course, is your friend, and there are absolutely hundreds of celebrity chefs around the world. Wonderful. Now, a musical consideration here was, in order to get the names to fit the music, they really had to be sort of 4 syllables, because in Emvoice each note represents a syllable. So Mrs. Beaton, Fanny Craddock, Gordon Ramsay, they are all 4 syllable names. And I was wondering how many chefs with 4 syllable names there were. And actually, I don't think there are enough to fill this song. So I had to improvise and adapt. So I juggled some of the names around. I didn't change any of the names, but I put names with 5 syllables with names with 3 syllables. And there were also some very helpful chefs with 2 syllable names. So that's really getting down to the nitty-gritty of how this thing came about. Now, when I got to the central section, I was thinking we've probably had enough of chef names by now, and there is a nice little change in the middle of the piece. So I thought, let me see if I can put something else in, which is why I came up with the idea of watching the chefs on TV, of buying their books and courses and so on. And this is all sort of very matter of fact. There was nothing poetic, if you like, about this. And I just thought that fit in with the overall feel of the piece. Anyway, there were a few lines like that, and then I finished off with more chefs' names. So all this time, in order to make sure that the notes and the syllables fit, I was probably working at a speed of around 40 or 50 BPM. So the final step in the process was to pick a speed which this would play back at, and I wanted a speed where you could just about make out all the words. That was the point after all, but also naturally it could not be anywhere near as fast as the original piano piece. Even Allegretto was too fast. The current speed is 74 BPM, and I think that works fairly well. Now, this whole process, researching the chefs' names, putting them into Emvoice, some of them I had to change the way they were spelled, sometimes I had to use phonemes. This took me 2 days. The piece is only 2 minutes long. Whether it was worth persevering with, I don't know. I actually think it's fun and I quite enjoy it. So I can only hope that you do too. Now, if you're looking for takeaways, there is one big thing from this which I already knew, and I am sure you already know as well. Now, I am not a very prolific composer. It takes me quite a while to write a piece of music, even a short piece of music. Now, I think that the ideas are bubbling around in here somewhere, and at some point when they're ready, they will come out. I've never been in a position where I've actually had to sit down and write a piece of music to a deadline. Actually, I have. That was a long time ago. Not for this video, but for the record, I spent 4 weeks doing this and I absolutely burnt myself out. This is one reason why I am in awe of film and media composers who write to deadlines. Now, I'm not saying I couldn't do it again. I really enjoyed the challenge. But if you get stuck, then your brain often works on solutions even when you aren't consciously thinking about the subject. I have experienced this many times in different creative pursuits. Now, I obviously can't guarantee that this is going to work for you, but I do think it is something which creative people have inside and part of their brain takes over. So that was my big takeaway. Now, I'm not going to play the piece because it's already up on the channel. If you want to listen to it, I'll put a card up there and there will be a link in the description. So was it worth 2 weeks of work to produce this 2-minute piece of music? You don't have to answer that. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope you got a little takeaway from this for yourself as a musician, as a composer, as a producer. If you are not already a subscriber but are still watching this, then you might want to click the big red button, ring the bell so you get informed of new videos as soon as I release them. Thank you. And click the big thumb because that really does help with the algorithms and all that sort of stuff. If you want to leave a comment, that would be great. And if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them to the best of my ability. As always, I really do appreciate you spending time with me, watching my videos and listening to my music. And for that, thank you very much indeed. I will see you again soon in the next video.